Welcome to the second part of my conversation with Ben Davies on And So I Took Their Eye. In this part, we discuss perspective, the idea of closure, and the short story form. If you're enjoying the conversation, please leave us a like and subscribe to the channel. Welcome back to the second part of my conversation with Ben Davies on And So I Took Their Eye. If you didn't watch part one, I suggest looking at that first. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, well, the fact that, I guess the form of the book, which is a collection of interlinked short stories. The stories move between a number of different narrators in different locations. And I think now more than ever, the issue of who gets to represent whom in writing is a very sensitive one. I have the impression, certainly from your writing, this is something you're aware of. So how did you approach that issue in this collection and in these stories? And maybe in a more general sense, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a conversation I've been having a lot recently, but probably with the release of the book as well. So it's kind of been prompted more and more. And as you say, it was something I was very, very aware of when writing the book. The fourth story, Whose Story, was very much a kind of look at that. That was actually another one that was very rooted in an experience that I had with my wife. And even though I took the story in a very different direction.
I hope you're not the husband in that story.
Yeah, I'm not the husband in the story. But
he's not a sympathetic character. So
yeah, but I kind of was very interested in that character, and the husband was almost a manifestation of some of the thoughts and questions that I'd been having with myself. Because we had this event in Greece, and I remember afterwards we were telling this story when we got home. It was quite a dramatic event, and it was a lot of different things happened. But I was telling this story, and as I was telling it more and more with people, and people were very interested to hear about it. But then I was also questioning of why am I telling this story? Am I telling this story for awareness, or to say what happened, or to raise awareness about all of these boats that were coming in and the awful conditions and situations that these people were in and what refugees and immigrants are going through? Or was there an element of telling it for my own ego? And I was kind of battling with that for a while. And a lot of these stories are actually almost not self-critical, but in writing them, it was almost like a therapeutic process where I was having conversations with myself. And in this instance, this was ultimately, it's a Syrian's experience. It's lots of Syrians' experience who were going through this. And yet it was a story that I was telling. And so even away from the book, I started thinking about stories, whose stories are whose to tell, and how can we tell them? And why do some people get to tell stories and why do some people not? And in that story, I very much take it to an extreme where to try and make a more obvious point. But I was grappling with this a lot throughout. I think the publishing industry has got many flaws, and for a long time it has obviously been a very centered around white Western voices, and that is changing in the last 10, 20 years, which is a very good thing, and I think that long may that continue. I also do think there is a space. I think literature is such a tool of empathy. I think that's the wonderful thing about literature, is that it can open doors and it can, really create and foster empathy. And I think that there is a space for doing that, but it has to be done very carefully and with respect and with empathy. I'm a straight white guy, and I can't claim to be the authority on, say, a Guatemalan's experience. That said, all of the stories in it were very much rooted in a lot of research, a lot of conversations. They were the Guatemalan ones were read by Guatemalan friends, where and sometimes they were no, you need to change this and you need to do this differently. And so there was a dialogue there, because I didn't go into it thinking that I am the definitive voice who can say this, because that would be completely wrong. but I still felt that there is a place for people writing outside of their experience and exploring that. I think if I had wrote 10 stories that were all from the perspective of a white male, that would also be a problematic collection and restrictive in its own way. And I think if we restrict writers to like their own demographic, I think we could lose something in literature. Like I'm a huge fan of novels that have got multi-perspective narratives, and I think that there is a place for that, but it has to be done very carefully, and I think you can't be precious about it. And I was very aware of it, and I'm still aware of it. I'm fully ready that if someone was like, no, this is not how an Italian would say this, or this is not how it, then I'm not going to stand there and argue it based on my own experience, because that wouldn't be right. But I still think there's a place for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Oh, thanks for that insight into your process, and good to hear, that you were talking to people and sort of bouncing those ideas off them, or even not the ideas, but the actual manuscript. And yeah, I think, what you said about, if you just to entirely center it and tell it from your own voice and positionality, then what does literature do if you're never sort of stepping outside those experiences?
I've also, on like a personal level, I think there's something in like researching these stories and learning. There was also like personal kind of learning for me, and I was learning about these different cultures, or I was understanding more about the ways people speak or the way people would act in certain situations. And so that was opening my eyes as well, which I think is always a good thing. I think it's a good thing that we are endlessly like curious and interested in learning in other, cultures and identities around the world. And I think everyone should be doing that. And I like that I was being pushed in the process of writing this. And
I mean, I was just thinking also, you talked about literature as a tool for empathy, and I agree. I don't think that happens automatically, but also, but then on the other hand, you began that answer by talking about how narrative can be ego driven. I think particularly in those, you catch yourself doing right in those interpersonal kind of situations where you're telling a story and you're doing it for the laugh or for the attention. I'm very aware that this is a YouTube channel, just seeing kind of how, the titles and the sort of clickbaity stuff is all about grabbing attention. And, you can see how, just to use YouTube as an example, how the title in some cases doesn't reflect the content, because, I see a lot of creators actually producing good content, but then we'll do an exaggerated title. But it does show how the framework, that context, is pushing people towards, this sort of need for attention. And that can happen on a personal level, on a more systemic level.
Definitely.
So something's happening to narrative as a result of our connectedness, I think.
Yeah, and I think every writer should question, like the why you write. And I mean, Orwell does a great book on why you write, but I think every writer should constantly be like questioning why they write. What is the meaning behind this book? And if you're writing purely because you enjoy writing, great. But like, I think it's an important dialogue to have with yourself, and to check yourself and to check your motivations throughout. Because if you don't, I think it's an industry where you could very quickly get lost in and end up not doing the right thing.
Let's move on to the fact that this is a collection of short stories. You just mentioned that you like these narratives where you have multiple perspectives, right? I mean, and I'm going to say something here. I did an interview a while back, which I'm assuming you didn't watch, with a Thai American writer called Maya Nardone. Quite similar collection of interlinked short stories. So called Welcome Me to the Kingdom, if you're interested, but quite similar, where you get characters kind of recurring. I mean, do you think short stories are actually now better suited than novels to address the sort of multifarious interconnections in this modern globalized world? Or, I mean, is the fact that this is a short story collection just a result of how you wrote it, or did that sort of arise naturally from the way you write?
It wasn't the initial intention. The first two stories that I wrote, though, were was the first one, The Gringo Died Today, and then the cricket one. And it was only, I kind of wrote them and they were done. And then when I like read them back, I kind of realized that they were speaking to each other. And that was the spark to be suddenly like, oh, these could all speak to each other. I could take this on. And I really enjoyed that process. And it was very easy for me to build these connections and link these stories. It flowed incredibly naturally, which I don't think is as possible in a novel. I mean, the fact that you could, in the short story collection, it can jump back in time and then jump forward and jump here and there, and it doesn't really matter. It's almost just like a fun part that they're linked, but it's not the essential driver. And I think that there's something really nice about short stories that they can do that, because they can stand alone on their own and make sense on their own. And most of these, maybe not the final one, but most of them can just be read on their own and they be okay. Whereas in a novel, you're very much kind of confined to like this, like a narrative that has to stay in this same world. And obviously there are some great novels that do go in lots of places. I don't know, like something like Cloud Atlas, where it jumps off, but it's still got, there's a thread running through it, I guess, in that as well. But I like that. I like with the short stories that you could kind of play. It was very much a chance to be creative. I actually have liked another novel that I had been working on and grinding myself down with, and I had kind of given up on novels. And so that's when I just started writing short stories, and I was really enjoying having that freedom to just experiment. And so a lot of these were experiments. Like the letters one was very much, I was just like, oh, I want to give that a try. Or the therapy one, or writing in different voices, with second and third and first, and playing with it. I like that I could do that, whereas you've got way more boundaries inside a novel. So that was really nice. I liked how they played off each other as well. Like the, which one's it? Like the therapy one and the cleaning Teslas one, that you could have like the same story almost, but told from two different viewpoints. And take it in different directions. And that was really nice. So, I don't know. I think there's something really nice about that form.
It's fun to read as well, because once I got there's going to be some connection somewhere, so start reading one, and sometimes it wasn't initially obvious, but when's it coming, and you sort of start to piece it together. That said, I mean, I'm just wondering, my experience of reading it, and I think this maybe comes from the fact that I do read a lot of these sort of multi-perspective texts. Very interested in transcultural fiction, and that sort of lends itself to this kind of form. So I think a lot of texts that are published as novels don't look dissimilar. And I think I read yours pretty much in the same way I'd read a novel. That might have come from the fact that, I was reading it, over a week because we were going to do this interview as well. So I think it's interesting that the boundary between the two is kind of hard to draw in some cases.
It's very much like, have you read Visit from the Goon Squad or The Candy House by Jennifer Egan?
I haven't actually, no.
Because they're pitched as I think she maybe won the Pulitzer, and it was very much pitched as a novel, but then if you read it, it's just a lot of interconnected stories. That was pitched as a novel. This is a short story collection, but I don't know, I like when things are interconnected, and I think, as you say, it's like nice to, I don't know, there's something exciting about bringing these different worlds together, and it shows how kind of small the world is, that you can do these connections so easily, and how linked we all are as human beings.
And I think, as you mentioned, with you got the therapist and then the Tesla story, where essentially for listeners, you're getting two different perspectives on the same events. So I think that does link back to what we were saying earlier about what perspective do you write from. Well, you can give a number, right? And that's
exactly. And if I had, say it was a thing on its own and it was just the therapist story, and if you read that on its own, it's I don't know, it'd be a kind of problematic story just on its own, but it needs that counterpoint perspective, and that again, I guess a multi-perspective novel can do that as well.
A final question on the form of the collection as a whole. So, and this goes back a little bit to revenge, or I suppose more justice. So I think it's clear from the stories that, people don't always get their just desserts. It's not a just world, but there is a circularity to the collection because we return to, the original location and characters. So we get that sense of closure at the end. But if justice tends to be elusive, so deeply unequal, unfair world. But do you think closure, so I guess a sense of being able to come to terms with life's injustice is possible? Is storytelling part of this? Is it necessary for this?
Yeah, I mean, it was for me at least. Like some of these stories, there was almost like cathartic to write in the way that I could imagine scenarios that might not play out in real life. And maybe there's, for a reader as well, there's that experience that when you read and you can see life turn out in maybe different ways. Obviously, literature doesn't always do that, but it can give closure. I don't know if that's putting a band-aid over bigger problems. The world, as you say, like I think that we're in a really bad place. And I don't think I'm the first. No, I'm obviously not the first to say this, but the world is I think we'll look back on this time in history as a really awful moment in humankind. And I think the ways that like refugees and immigrants and unhoused, they're all being treated, that was something I wanted to speak to in the novel. And I wanted to offer some kind of empathy towards that, and literature enabled me to do that, to kind of give a voice or give my care to these situations that doesn't always happen in the real life. And maybe that provides, I don't know if it can provide closure. I don't think it can at all. Maybe it's just light relief. Depends what role literature plays in society. But even I couldn't do it on all of them. Like the True Colors story, like some of them I'd love to have ended in another way, but I couldn't write that because then I wanted to make certain points with these stories as well. So do I believe in closure? I don't know. I don't know.
I'm just
not sure I can answer that. I don't really know if it can offer that.
I suppose part of my motivation for that question was, I'm thinking particularly sort of when postmodern literature was sort of in full force, closure in literary fiction was out the window, suspicion towards any sort of meta narrative. You can't you got to leave it open ended, right? And I feel, even though, maybe we moved on from postmodernism, there's still, if you're doing clever literary fiction, you can't just give it a neat ending. I mean, what do you think there is space for endings that maybe pack a punch, maybe a bit didactic, which I think did go out of fashion for a period?
I think I'm very much that. I feel that maybe this comes back to what you were saying about what I was saying about short story collections. But with a short story, you have such few amount of words, and I really wanted them to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Every story in there, I wanted there to be like a kind of. I didn't want it to be like necessarily a twist always at the end. Some of them kind of have that surprise ending, but it was. I did, in that writing sense, I did want to create that because I have been endlessly frustrated by short stories that kind of just start and then just leave you there, and I'm like going on Google and being like, what did I just read? And I feel like I'm unintelligent because I don't understand this, and I didn't want that experience. I wanted to make a point with these stories. I wasn't trying to be subtle, and so in that sense, they are offering some sort of closure, I guess, in a literary sense.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your answers. So we'll come back for part 3, and I'd like to hear about your artist retreat and the novel you're working on, and you can give us recommendations as well. So please, everybody, join us for part 3.